Good morning. I'm just going to continue with my series on the World Championship, working my way backwards. Definitely the wrong direction, but I'm committed to it. No, I'm not giving it up. When I've finished with all the World Championship games, you can watch them in reverse order if you really want to enjoy them how they should be enjoyed, but I'm committed, so this is it. So we're back in 2010, and it's the reigning champion Vishy Anand against Veselin Topalov. The match was played in Sofia in Bulgaria. Uh, Veselin Topalov is Bulgarian, and FIDE said that Anand could refuse to play at what would be a home game for Topalov, but he had no objections. So the match was actually delayed for a day due to volcanic eruption in Iceland. I don't know if you remember that. Completely unpronounceable Icelandic volcano, which I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to pronounce now, but had just erupted and air travel was delayed, and so the match started a day later and everything went a day. Opening ceremony was a day later, first game was a day later, and they continued that way to the end of the match. It was first to 12, it was, sorry, the best of 12. And they played under Art Vishy's insistence Sofia rules, which have to do with draws, when you can make a draw offer, how you can make a draw offer, and draw offers had to be made through the arbiter. You couldn't offer your opponent a draw directly, so they played the match in complete silence. The Sofia rules are used in modern chess, but a different version of them, which doesn't allow draws, except by repetition, of course, before the 30th move, to try and encourage people to keep playing. There wasn't a lot of draws in this match, although there was some. I'll just check the statistics on my iPad. Yeah, they played just 12 games and 3, 4, 5 of them were decisive, so there was 7 draws despite the Sofia rules. Okay, so Topalov begins with white and he plays d4. Knight f6, c4, making a big centre. Oh, I'll get rid of the analysis. g6, fianchetto the bishop, king's Indian defence. Knight comes to f3 and he plays d5, the Grunfeld defence. Topalov goes for the exchange variation and Vishy takes with the knight. The knight is chased with the pawn e4 and it's taken. And now we can see that white's queenside pawn structure is a little bit worse, and this bishop will be quite dominant on this long diagonal. White has the centre. Black has maybe a tiny little advantage in development. Bishop comes to c4 and the pawn comes to c5. The d4 pawn is of course pinned, because if he takes, then bishop takes pawn, picks up an exchange. So the knight comes to d2 to defend the pawn, and the knight comes to c6 and the bishop comes to e3, an attacker and a defender for the pawn, and both sides castle. And the knight comes to a5, maybe a little bit out of the way, but in chasing the bishop comes to d3, and this makes one less defender for the crucial d4 square, which they're fighting very much over, because the queen isn't any longer defending, but it's still defended 1, 2, 3 times and attacked 1, 2, 3 times. So yeah, pawn comes to b6 so that he can develop the bishop. Might develop it here and attack the pawn. Might actually, if he arranges things properly, be able to develop it to a6. A queen comes to d2 with the real threat of playing bishop to h6 and getting rid of the dark squared Fianchetto bishop and weakening the Anand's king position. Myself, in these kind of positions, given the opportunity, I play rook to e8 so that if he comes here with the bishop, I have the opportunity to retreat to h8, and that's not as weak a position. You get to retain the bishop, but Anand says, well, he would rather have an extra pawn in the centre than retain the bishop. So bishop comes to h6 and he takes with the d pawn. The bishop is taken with the king, takes with the d pawn, and he takes with the e pawn. And so he's now got 6 pawns against 5, and he's got a free pawn in the centre. But otherwise his position is fairly weak, and the king is quickly exposed to possible attacks. Rook comes to c1, taking possession of the open file quickly, directly. Queen comes to d6. Obviously, queen has got to develop. She would have liked to play to c7, but the rook on c1 prevents that. She comes to d6. Pawn comes to f4, so that he's threatening to play f5, chase the queen off her good square, force her to block the bishop. Anand plays f6. Ben Fingal didn't like that. No, often people say that you shouldn't play f6, and right enough, in general, it can be a very weakening move. Usually it's weakening because it opens up this diagonal against the king. The king's not on this diagonal, so is it still weakening? Yes, it is, but it's weakening because it opens up, well, not that square, it opens up all these 6 squares on the 7th rank, making a rook which gets the 7th rank extremely powerful. And it's very difficult for black to stop, for Anand to stop Topalov from getting his rook to the 7th rank. But he goes to attack the structure first. So if he takes, he'll take back with the pawn, and then, rook here for instance. So the queen comes to e5 to kind of try and hold things together. The knight comes to f5. The pawn comes to g5 and chases the knight away from that good square. But it opens up a new good square for the knight, which Topalov uses immediately, and the king comes to g8. Can't really come forward. It's too risky. The pawn will come here. He'll say check. He's just asking for it, really. So he goes to g8, and Topalov goes to attack against the structure immediately. Pawn comes to h6, but now he opens up the h file, which Topalov tries to exploit immediately with rook to f3 heading for h3. And now a pawn sacrifice. His idea is to play to, when it is taken, to play to h3 and then use the f7 square for his attack. Sorry, it's not a pawn sacrifice. Sacrifice of a knight for a pawn. Anand takes with the king, which is slightly worse than taking with the queen, but only very, very slightly. The rook comes to h3 as planned. Rook comes to g8. This is to give the king this square, not to interpose after the check. Check, and he comes to f7. At the moment, the queen covers c7, so it isn't possible for him to play rook to c7 check. But he plays rook to h7 check. King comes to e8, and he doubles the rooks on the 7th rank, threatening one of the rooks to e7 check, picking up the queen for 2 rooks. Not necessarily an advantage, but it would be in this position. With these 2 passed pawns, they would very quickly overwhelm the black king. So king comes to d8. and the bishop comes to b5. Obviously, if the bishop is taken, queen takes here, and mate will very soon follow. So he's now threatening to play rook here, check, takes, and rook here. So queen takes the pawn to kind of open up an escape square, but it's too late because he takes on c8 check. If he takes back with the rook, then the rook will come here, force the king here, and then the rook will come here and say check and pick up the queen. If he takes with the king, then yeah, queen c1 check, followed by queen c7 check, will very quickly lead to mate. So yeah, Anand resigned, and Topalov takes an early lead in the very first game. He wasn't as big an expert in the Grunfeld as he was in the semi-slab, for example, but it was still considered a bit of a shock. And for the first time in 2010, Vishy Anand had Magnus Carlsen as part of his team of seconds who worked on his preparation for him. Looks like the preparation went wrong in this game, but just because you've prepared a line doesn't mean that you definitely win in that line. So yeah, we'll see what happens in the rest of the match. Don't forget to like, share, comment and subscribe to my videos. Thanks. Bye.